environment. And it's just like this constant, like vicious cycle of us like overutilizing the resources we have just because they exist and they're there and they're available to people. And then any sort of natural resource automatically equals like money. And I think like because of our just greed to have things and like constantly have and be consuming stuff, I just feel like at the end of the day we're driving ourselves in a hole, because like as we destroy the environment, we feel like we're advancing in other things. I would say like above all, I think that the more damage that we're inciting in the environment while we're having like so many technological advances, pardon me, I feel like we're going to see this like standstill where we've utilized so much of a resource that like in this case it's trees, like all of a sudden we're going to pivot to something else and then drive that into the ground too, and then pretty soon we'll be left with absolutely nothing, and we're going to lose our what we think is like finite renewable resources. The quality of that is going to be so lackluster that we are just ultimately driving ourselves into doom.
The permit has been issued, but the company still needs to have an environmental impact assessment of the proposed logging. And so there is a window for the communities and the broader public to argue against the plans. And certainly there are going to be tremendous environmental impacts. Unfortunately, environmental impact assessments are often just a rubber stamping process, but it is a political window to put pressure on the government to reverse its decision on this permit.
Corporations to like just refrain from doing these things, but I feel like it's up to governments, individual governments, and like governments who are collaborative in these spaces to like really have laws and restrictions, because there's so many examples. I'm thinking like the pipeline in BC, if like you're familiar with that project.
Yeah.
But basically like people were lobbying against the pipeline, but in terms of like the actual construction of it, like the government would just say, oh, we have fines in place to prevent oil spills, like these companies are going to be very careful that oil spills aren't going to happen. However, the fines are so minuscule in terms of the size of the project that they'd rather just like make the environmental violation, pay the fine, and then just continue on their way. It didn't really affect them, right? So I think it's really up to governments, if they do care about sustainability, to make sure that their policies are serious and strict and their fines are strict too, in order to just sway corporations from countries are being put in the position that they are to like overutilize their resources just because of countries like the West who are coming there to steal their resources and extract resources for their own personal gain. I don't think it's unethical for them to participate in cutting down their own trees when they themselves know their land the best. I think it's just like, again, up to us to prevent that from happening and be sure that we're like advocating for the voice of the underrepresented, because as much as they might have a different opinion or a difference of like culture and things like that, like they know that best, and we know that we're going there with like like anytime we see a really positive economic outcome from something, like we can kind of say like, oh well, while it's not necessarily the best for the environment, it's like good, like greater good, it's helping communities overall. But in my perspective, like I genuinely feel like we can come to like we can have a more holistic solution to things if we just think a little bit harder and we like utilize all the voices who have stake in the conversation. Like if we're all communicating together and collaborative with our approach to solve the problem, I feel like we can always find a better solution than the ones we have to be able to engage in public discussion and public discourse. Like that's why we go for like these very simple solutions, but these are also solutions that we've been like implementing for the last however many years. Like I think it's time we just start from scratch and we actually like sit down and do more public consultations and like have discussions with stakeholders in these types of projects so that we're able to find a better solution that is like still beneficial for the economy. But at the end of the day, like, I mean, we're already going through every single crisis possible in Canada. We have the housing crisis. We have like food is just absolutely inflated. Like grocery stores are like so expensive. I don't think we're in a good place in the economy regardless. So why are we sacrificing the lives of other people in the world when like we are already suffering regardless? Like our debt level is going to decrease by very little, even if we have some sort of like economic upturn from these projects that we're doing in developing.
In terms of international agreements, so it's notable that we do not have a global convention, global forest convention, which would, potentially have instruments to assist and encourage and even, not force, but strongly encourage countries to change their regulations around logging practices. And it's been, environmental organizations have been calling for such a treaty for a long time, but it has never come to fruition. So I think we need those international efforts to coordinate and to provide the impetus for individual nations to take the actions that they need to take to reduce deforestation, to change forest practices, to emphasize the benefits for local communities, not only of timber harvesting, but also of all the other values that are derived from healthy and existing forests.
Kind of forcing them into making decisions that they don't want. I guarantee you that the people who are indigenous to that land and any of the public there has already had massive uproar about this whole project, especially since it's pertaining to a third of the forest that they have there now, right? But because governments are in desperate need to be in the black and not be in the red at the end of the year, I feel like they're just doing this because they know that they have to, and they know that they don't really have any other options, and it's the fault of Western countries putting that pressure on them that causes them to have to make decisions such as these. So I think it's a huge ask, but it's more like we need our leaders to be conscious of the impacts that they're having on these countries and recognizing that they're just participating in modern day colonization by extracting resources and extracting supplies and money from countries that already can't afford their day-to-day operations and their civilians just living like basic human beings. I feel like it's just massive human rights violations, and it goes swept under the rug because it happens in such a nuanced way. So I would say that the best solution in terms of mitigation is engaging as many of those key stakeholders, again, like I was saying earlier, engaging as many of those key stakeholders in the conversation, because I guarantee you, if they're already underrepresented in politics, there's so many voices that we're not hearing, and ultimately leaders are making decisions for their country that benefit absolutely no one and just wasting money just because they never took the time to listen. So in anything related to sustainability, a holistic way is looking at every single aspect of the economy, the people who are affected, and walking through that step-by-step checklist of the who, what, when, where, why, to really understand the depth of the problem, and then coming up with a solution after the fact and after consulting all of those people.